It's just about 6:30 on my 66th birthday on the 24th of February 2022. On one hand, it's quite ironic, it's very sad and tragic, in fact, that I'm recording this video just as I watched the news of Russia attacking Ukraine, and my awful sense of those hundreds of thousands of soldiers on both sides, mostly men, who are likely to both suffer and inflict incredible damage, hurt, pain, killing on each other. And that I'm actually recording this video on something that seems so minuscule in proportion or in comparison to it. However, I have a deeper belief that the fundamentals of what I'm talking about here and the struggles involved and the whole idea of veracity and maintenance of truth and of exposure of malicious and malevolent, unfair misinformation and lies, that whole culture and understanding of the human race is what allows what is happening in Ukraine to happen. So with that sort of deep introduction, this here I'm doing this is a review of messages that have been sent between John Joseph Bradley and myself, Liam Gógáin, over the period, and the first one here can be seen from Saturday the 18th of September of 2021. So I want to read into the record this message correspondence, and also to give some context to explain same. So the first, it says this, a message from JJ saying, "Hi Liam, just got that message, see you account, I'll call later. I have no transport at the moment." So this relates to the factual element that in early September last year, 2021, John Joseph Bradley was the treasurer of Sciobol Navarre, the men's shed here in Gweedore. There was a monthly meeting held in the shed, and at this meeting, JJ suddenly placed an ultimatum to the meeting that unless a particular table was moved without any delay, he was going to leave the shed. And without there being any further discussion, he actually got up and walked voluntarily from the shed and effectively left the shed. Now, while he did so as an individual, that's very tragic, more importantly, he was the treasurer of our shed. And at that time, the shed were in debt to 3 members to the sum of about €9,000. We had secured grant funding, but JJ Bradley, in the months since March 2021, when he took up the role of treasurer, had failed to recoup any of these monies. The next thing JJ Bradley did was that he held the shed to ransom, stating that he would not return either a laptop, which had been secured under a digital literacy grant, and an iPad, which had been purchased for the role of treasurer, nor would he hand over the documents relating to the role of treasurer, which would have completely prevented the shed from moving forward, unless he was paid a sum of money which he said he was entitled to claim back in costs and expenses. As a result of that, he also personally insisted that I, Liam Gógáin, personally would attend at a meeting that he would have with the present chairman, Austin O'Donnell, which was another example of him undermining trust in the chairman. But he was the person who asked for me to be at the meeting. Having been the previous chairman of the group and having held the information about the accounts, etc., over the last number of years, Austin asked me to assist the shed to move past this. So I put the information together. So both of us met with JJ in my house, and this is referred to somewhat later on when he makes a claim in relation to it. So perhaps I'll come back to that at that stage, just to say that at that meeting, I had been trying to trawl through the accounts and make sense of them. There were many of the entries in the credit union account which had not been annotated by JJ, and he refused or couldn't help in any way to ascertain what those sums of money were. I'll come back to that as we come to that particular, his assertion of what happened. But moving on to Friday, what happened at meeting at the end of it was, in order to enable the shed to move forward, we had to basically pay a ransom to JJ to get our materials back. And then, as a result of Micheál Call, who had suffered a recent bereavement, we hadn't got money to pay JJ. So Micheál Call had basically to put bereavement money that he'd received into the account in order that JJ's costs essentially would be settled. Now, just to say that some of those costs, €576 of them, at the AGM of March 2022, March 4th, I had asked JJ to put together what he felt costs that he had expended on the shed were due to him, and he had provided documents in relation to coming to a sum of 576. When he now returned to the table, that sum, he said, was being augmented up to a figure of 1,100 or so euro, and he claimed for monies that dated numbers of years ago. But again, this was done under a process of ransom in order just to get the shed passed. That my advice to Austin was just pay him money, and therefore we had to ask Micheál to tide us over in the short term with money that he had collected from bereavement in order the shed to survive. So on Friday, the 1st of October, JJ wrote to say, "Hey Liam, I'm just wondering, is there a reason why I haven't been paid by the shed yet?" And this was all us struggling to get money into the account so he could be paid. The next correspondence now. So JJ left the shed at that time when we resolved whatever financial issue. I've had no dealings with JJ Bradley in the months since that period, mid-September, except in so far as these contacts which we'll discuss. So he contacted me on the 7th of October. He had rung me to say that Tesco had contacted him to say that from their communities fund they were going to donate €400 to the shed. So you'll notice in my response, JJ gave the detail. He said, Tesco contact details. Sorry, I can't remember the lady's name. So, it was pretty unhelpful. Sorry, I don't doubt that JJ was trying to help, but as usual, JJ had no details. So I had to go off and trawl through the accounts trawl through Tesco to find a relevant person, which I did. Anyway, on the 7th of October, I just got back to him and say, "Hi JJ, thanks for the info and for your initiative in approaching Tesco. It does take time for initiative to filter through. I spoke to the woman, Siobhan, and provided her with the necessary details." So I went off and dealt with it and went out of my way to point to thank JJ, because Jay was the one who showed the initiative to go to approach Tesco in the first place. So it would be very unfair for JJ to feel that he wasn't recognised in this regard. On the 8th of February this year, so the only other contact I remember having from JJ was perhaps a phone call from him when he stated to me that the HSE had been in contact with him in relation to a grant application under the National Lottery Fund, to which JJ's name would have been put as the treasurer at the time. And again, he was unable to provide me with names or phone numbers or anything, but at least he had contacted me, and I went off and resolved that matter. So this is where this present. So I've had no contact otherwise. So JJ Bradley had no contact with me in terms of letting me know information or informing me of anything, which will become relevant in later posts. On Tuesday, the 8th of February this year, you can see a message from me at 9:29. It says, "JJ, I had just received a phone call at 9:20 from you," that's 10 minutes earlier, "stating that you had a call from James Boyle," that's Jimmy Boyle, "saying he was barred from the shed. I responded, clarifying that Jimmy was expelled from the shed. You then stated that you think it is now time to close the door on the shed." These are in inverted commas. These are JJ's actual words. "You continued stating you were now going to make a phone call which would ensure that the shed will never get funds again. I responded by asking you to repeat your statement so that I could record it. At this call, you suddenly ended the call. For the record, Mary Cleary witnessed your conversation as she was beside me, and the call was on speakerphone. Immediate contemporaneous note." So this is my contemporaneous note sent within 10 minutes of receiving that phone call. 2 points of this. JJ stated that it is time to close the door on the shed. And the second thing is that he stated to me he would make a phone call which would ensure that the shed would never receive funds. Now, the background to this is JJ has persistently told me over the last number of years that he is well placed and highly connected within Sinn Féin. And for that reason, when I think somebody tells me I'm going to make one phone call and kill you off, sorry, I use those words pejoratively, one phone call and stop you getting funds. I use the word kill metaphorically there. And therefore, I have to presume that someone saying that would have the confidence of knowing that they have a toe into some area of power, which I presumed, because the only connection I'd ever heard him talking about was his close connection with the leadership of Sinn Féin, that I presumed that this is what he was suggesting. So JJ's immediate response was, "Thanks for that, Liam. I don't have anything to hide." Now, I'll just suggest the fact that when I suggested to JJ to just hold a minute while I set up a recorder so we could record a statement, he ceased the phone call immediately. Anyway, I got back immediately to him to say, "JJ, as you have chosen not to contradict my note of your unsolicited call to me at this early hour, I take it that you accept the veracity of my account without my needing to have an audio recording. The meaning of your subsequent text eludes me. I suggest if you have something you wish to share, then you should do so in an adult manner. I note for the record that you were not present, not a party to the Sciuball monthly meeting last evening." That's the meeting in which Jimmy Boyle was expelled, and that this is the second threat of some sort of power of exposure that you have levied against the Shed. Now, just to say that back in September, JJ had told me that he had said that he threatened the idea of bringing in some accounts people from Donegal County Council to examine our figures, etc. Again, alluding to the fact that suggesting that there was something wrong with what we were doing and he was going to expose all this. None of this happened. And again, this generality of threat. So going back to the note, furthermore, I believe you should, as a matter of respect, appropriately address your concerns, given that you have no locus standi in the decision of a body that the Sciuball that you voluntarily left months ago directly to the chairman. So here's a person who has walked out in the Shed, who's basically almost told us in the side by holding the Shed to ransom in terms of accounts and accounts information until he was paid sums of money. And I'll come to more detail of that again later. Now, not present at a meeting and yet interpreting for himself what he believes happened at that meeting as a result of a phone call with Jimmy Boyle. I then go on to say, I do hope that upon some integrated, mature reflection, you will come to appreciate that the value of the Shed in the community, the fundamental core value that threats and ultimata are unhealthy in any group, and that respect, firstly, for decisions of the majority, and secondly, that treating other members with dignity and respect are essential elements of a healthy, collaborative, voluntary community group. Now, this is in relation to the fact that J.J. Bradley had offered posed a threat, an ultimatum to the Shed back in September that if he didn't get his way, not the rule of the majority, that he would walk, and as a result of that, ransom the Shed, hold the Shed to ransom. Finally, I ask that you note that I feel personally intimidated by your unsolicited early morning call and threat, and respectfully request that you desist from this misconduct. Liam, I just want to put on record, JJ has told me how closely affiliated he is with Sinn Féin. I've lived my life in Dundalk on the East Coast. I've lived through the Troubles. I'm well aware of what threats by people related to the Republican movement and Sinn Féin have led to in the past. And I am not impervious to the sense of threat that I would feel as a newcomer into this area. Maybe I'm here a number of years, but I don't know the undercurrents here. And, being rung first thing in the morning with such a very forcefully delivered threat is something I'm not comfortable with. Remember, I had no locus standi in this. I'm not a member of the committee. I'm the ex-chairman. I'm the president of the Shed, but I am not in the executive, and I have simply been assisting the present chairman and committee to resolve the financial issues which have been brought about by the behaviour of JJ, John Joseph Bradley, in how he exited the role of treasurer. So there's a follow-up text from JJ saying, "Thanks for that, Liam, I don't have anything to hide." So this was me simply reiterating what he had sent earlier. So on Thursday the 17th of February, so this is a number of days later. So it reads, this is from John Joseph Bradley. "Good morning, Liam. I have seen the video you made about the electrics in the Shed. You installed the plugs throughout the Shed, both in the workshop and the new offices. So just for comment here, note the word he said, I installed the plugs. I've repeatedly said to John Joseph Bradley, plugs are not sockets. And in the audio recorded attempt of a complaint that J.J. Bradley made in the Garda station in Bunbeg on Friday last, remember this is February 24th, on Thursday last, it was Thursday last in the afternoon, that he was referring to the guards in that I had installed plugs. You install sockets are what were installed. People have plugs that are associated with items that they plug into the wall. Details matter in an investigation. Anyway, JJ goes on to say, I and other members of the shed pointed out to you on numerous occasions, how dangerous the plugs are and the risk to anyone in the shed. So just for the record, these sockets rather than the plugs, because we're talking about sockets here. The work he's talking about took place between November, well actually some of it in 2018-19 and the rest of it from November 2019 in through February, March 2020 when COVID effectively closed us down. So if John Joseph Bradley was aware of this, and later on we'll see him referring to his qualifications in health and safety, then there is no record anywhere of John Joseph Bradley ever noting any of these complaints to anybody, and certainly never to the committee. In the recorded AGM of the shed on March 4th, 2021, which is on YouTube for anybody to see, JG is nothing other than effusive in his thanks to me in every sense, and even under any other business, none of this was mentioned. So up until the time that J.J. Bradley decided to leave because the group wouldn't bend to his ultimatum, there was no record of any mention of unsafe wiring in any way. And I repeat, he has said, I and other members of the shed pointed out to you on numerous occasions. So numerous means a multiple of absolutely more than 2, 3 or 4. Would suggest in the region perhaps of 5 or 6 times. He has produced no record, and there is no record of any of these things. The other thing, yet again, he refers to other members of the shed. These are unspecified people. So like everything else John Joseph Bradley does, everything is unspecified. Okay. He then moves on to say, you chose to ignore the warnings. Now, I want to make sure these warnings were never made and were instrumental in having a member expelled from the shed because he refused to accept this situation. So I have to assume that the member he's speaking of is his co-partner in this escapade called Jimmy Boyle. And again, it is untrue to say that Jimmy Boyle was expelled from the shed because he refused to accept the situation that I wouldn't deal with warnings. Jimmy Boyle was expelled from the shed as a result of him failing on 5 separate independent points to respond to the directions which had been democratically agreed and supported by the group, given to him by the chairman. So after a series of interactions and intercommunications, which I facilitated as the intermediary to ensure that Jimmy Boyle could not continue as done, denied that he was being given information. At the February meeting of Sgibble Navarre, the group voted to the unanimous support of everybody except Jimmy Boyle that he would be expelled. Again, J.J. Bradley was not present or a party to this meeting. So any information he can have from this, as provided by Jimmy Boyle, is at best hearsay, unless Jimmy Boyle produced a recording of this meeting. To say this meeting was recorded in Zoom because we run a hybrid meeting. So anything I'm saying in relation to the meeting has been recorded and is preserved in video format. JJ goes on to say, and this is important, I have studied health and safety law and read the Health and Safety Act and have some qualifications in that field. So if we just review what John Joseph Bradley has said, he claims to have qualifications in the field of health and safety, and he claims to have read the Health and Safety Act and gives suggestion that he studied it and therefore must know it. So I'm not sure when he claims to have studied, I'm not sure when he's got these qualifications, but let's presume he's had these qualifications throughout his period of occupancy of the shed. Then surely the fact that he has actually failed to document and point out these alleged inconsistencies or unsafe practice, then there's a whole area of responsibility there for him personally and how he exposed other people. Furthermore, during the period from March 2020 right through into the middle of 2021, the shed was officially closed, except for an agreement which I made then as the chairman for Jimmy Boyle and JJ. They were essentially allowed under the radar to be in the shed for the specific reason that Jimmy Boyle had come to my house in March 2020 and told me that if he didn't get access to the shed and couldn't be doing something, that he would be so isolated and etc., that he would lead him to get a gun and damage himself. That's what he said to me, and I made a calculated determination that at least if only himself and JJ etc. were around the shed, that there wouldn't be a lot of occupancy. There was a lot of air movement etc., and it was a safer option than to leave him to possibly carry out the mental health threats that he suggested he would do. During this period, Jimmy Boyle and JJ basically they had the shed almost to themselves. And in this period, John Joseph Bradley strung 3 extension cables high across the shed floor, which there will be a video provided for. According to Jimmy Boyle, on the Tuesday afternoon after the February meeting, he specifically stated that he did not take hand or part in putting in that wiring, but that John Joseph Bradley had wired it himself. On this day a week, in the afternoon before we went to the barracks, John Joseph Bradley refused to acknowledge that he knew anything about these plugs and sockets that he wired. These to say that I've taken photographs of the dangerous situation in which they are. I mean, bare cables, effectively. I have had to cut the plug off one of these circuits because they're unsafe. Anyway, no one else in the shed has been using these over the last year and a half except Jimmy Boyle and John Joseph Bradley. So that's some context within which this claim of being safety conscious, etc., must be considered. So now we move on to JJ saying, I consider your actions to be a case of reckless endangerment. Now, I've had to look up what reckless endangerment was, and it seems to be associated with the 2005 non-fatal actions against a person or something act. So they relate to very serious issues of either being knowing or should have known that you're leaving people exposed to danger. And John Joseph Bradley has put a raffler rumour out, an unsubstantiated one on a repetitive basis in Facebook, to say that there was near misses, etc. Now, none of these are true, none of them are documented, and they're simply not real. They're just fabricated. Anyway, moving on, John Joseph Bradley says, this is probably one of the worst cases I ever seen, having spent a lifetime in the building industry. So to my knowledge, John Joseph Bradley has been a scaffolder and has worked widely throughout the world in scaffolding and businesses. And it's quite a big statement to make that this is the worst case he's ever seen. Anyway, he feels, I feel I have no alternative but to make the complaint to the HSE and to An Garda. Now again, details. HSE, or the Health Services Executive. The HSE is the Health and Safety Authority. Those are not the same organisation. In the heel of the hunt, the complaint lodged, I believe, by John Joseph Bradley, was to the HSA, not the HSE. But again, details matter. I put you, now he said he's no alternative but to make a complaint to the HSE and to Garda. I understand that on the Thursday, because remember, this was sent earlier than that. Later on the Thursday, when I accompanied him or followed him to the mention on his invitation, that's when he, as far as I know, made the first reference to any of this to the Gardaí. I put you on notice therewith to immediately close the shed and to refrain from entering the shed or in any way to interfere with the electrics in the shed from receipt of this message. Please do not put the public at any further risk. JJ. So I just want to make it clear that these sort of claims, none of these are substantiated in any way, in any detail. And their pure function, from my experience in relation to this, is to cause harassment to the shed. So I responded at 1:45 in the morning Friday to say, JJ, I have read your carefully constructed note and reflected on its contents, as I explained in the Garda station earlier, as confirmed by the recording of the... I'm not sure what happens here, sorry. Oh yeah, sorry, I'll read the whole thing. As confirmed by the recording of the conversation details matter in an investigation. Your focus on plugs is misconceived. However, the attached photo of your own unapproved handiwork allied to your insistence of your own legal knowledge of safety, etc., as per your note, might give you further cause for reflection. I can confirm that your misinformation of the Gardaí that a public open night was to take place in the Skjobol tonight did not occur, and it seems that no one in the shed was aware of such plans. Yes, that too is in the recording. Now, for the listeners' information, JJ had claimed in the Garda station, and this recording is available for review, that there was a public open night taking place in the Skjobol that night. Now, this is a man who has had nothing to do with the shed for months and months and months, again creating direct misinformation and claiming that the public were going to be put at risk. I go on. I had hoped that you might resile from your malevolent attempts to destroy the shed, given that you invested much of your time and energy during its construction, as is evidenced by the photo history. On the other hand, I checked today, and not one member can remember a single solitary contribution by Jimmy to that construction, whereas you, along with the others, really put in a shift. As I said, with a wonderfully engaging and positive group of digital literacy collaborative learners today in the shed for 3 delightful hours, I was somewhat saddened to note, or as I sat with a wonderfully engaging group. Sorry about that. I was somewhat saddened to note your absence, self-willed of course. I thought of how interested you had been, how positively you pioneered engagement with Zoom, with laptops learning, even to the point of being provided with a new iPad before you just threw it all away. A sad lost opportunity for you. Now at least the iPad gets to be recycled to another community learner, while you miss out on a wonderful experience that you had put such effort into fostering. Where did it all go wrong, JJ? Was it really worthwhile to throw away all that camaraderie, the bowling, the card games, your wonderful wood turning, the opportunity to upskill with digital IT, the sense of community, all on your own doorstep? I once read an article about the absurdity of sticking a needle into oneself in the hope that some other person will feel the hurt. Is it so important for you to try to personally destroy Austin, who's the chairman, who you had supported for the role of chairman back a year ago? For, again, note here, it was JJ who nominated Austin for the role. Why did you feel the persistent need to undermine him? What did he do to you, JJ, that has elicited such unhealthy vindictiveness? Would you actually want to be a member of any group where one individual would be allowed to issue ultimatums against the will of the majority? Had there been any point at which you stopped to reflect, just to ask yourself, am I really on message here? Is there something there in the background, some deep hurt which drives this refusal to look at your actual behaviour in all of this? As we work together alongside each other to progress the shed, while Jimmy focused purely on Jimmy's interests, as you sweated working on shed development, while Jimmy salivated on the opportunity to have a whole shed to himself, only to focus on his own private personal interests as against any engagement with the shed community. Did you ever imagine it would come to this, where you would invite me to follow you today into a Garda station, where you maliciously tried to lodge a complaint against me personally, accusing me of reckless endangerment out of putting people's lives at risk? Do you now really believe that my character is so flawed as to recklessly place other members' lives in danger? Does it give you some perverse pleasure to question really whether I am an engineer? Just again for the record, JJ stated to the guards that I have said I'm an engineer, but he's not really sure if I am or not. Anyway, for the record, yes, I am a retired professional chartered electrical engineer. In all your dealings with me, where I assisted you in learning the role of treasurer, do you think I am or was a person of such poor character as you now accuse me of? Given our ages and medical histories, you, me, Jimmy, is it really a wise choice to attempt to destroy a wonderful shed community that you should have been proud to have helped develop? Is Jimmy such a good friend to you that would so readily dissociate himself from you when you walked out of the shed last September, when he stated he disagreed and said you had no hand or part in your early morning, that he had no hand or part in your early morning unsolicited threatening phone call to me on Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. That should have been 9:20. You stated today with Mary present that at Christmas you had reflected on how happy you were with your present post-shed life. This was the conversation that John Joseph Bradley and I had in the presence of Mary Cleary on the Thursday afternoon before going to the Garda barracks. By definition, any insight you think you may have about events in the shed since you voluntarily walked out can only be through the skewed one-sided feedback from Jimmy. In other words, JJ had said to me earlier that afternoon that he had a good idea what was going on at shed. When I tried to say to him that third-party information could be very misleading. Anyway, Are your septic conversations so unbalanced as to not question why every single member at the Shed meeting except Jimmy voted for his expulsion? Not even Jimmy voted against the proposal, choosing only to abstain. How could he vote against the proposal, of course, as he subsequently claimed he did everything in his power to ensure that he got expelled, which is what he now says he wanted? Do you really want to set aside the happiness you felt at Christmas and trade it in for the hassle of traipsing around from door to door to badmouth the men's shed, to personally destroy Austin, to damage my personal and professional reputation, to face the energy-sapping demands of being required to actually back up your claims, if you do manage to find a willing ear? Do you actually believe when you made that intimidating early call that you yourself could, with one phone call, ensure that the Schiphol would never get another euro of grant aid? Are you really that well connected, even politically? You had regularly told me how central you are in the SF party locally. Would Pierce Doherty really want to associate himself with such threats? It could all have been so different. Was giving the ultimatum that Bernard be dealt with on your terms really worth throwing it all away for? Does your future involvement with a self-serving Jimmy really offer a healthier proposition than your relationship with such good men in the Shed, than your enjoyment in working alongside MJ in extended family activities? For me, I have no agenda with you or Jimmy, save to defend my reputation to serve the long-term interests of the men's Shed. Today, while in conversation, you refuse to acknowledge that you yourself installed the overhead wiring system. However, the recorded experience of the interaction at the Garda station and listening back to the vacuity of the complaint, which failed to muster even an official registration, has been and will be instructed to and assist both Shed members and the wider interest group about your approach and your desire to damage, to soothe whatever internal pain you have. God only knows. Quo vadimus, I wonder. Perhaps a penny will drop. If it does, I do hope it's not too late. Whatever happens, for me to be prepared to apply my limited energies to this issue, and it does personally stress me greatly. Unlike you, it does not make me happy. Not even seeing you and Jimmy leaving the Shed, although the behaviours of both you seriously needed excision. I need to see the recording, collection, aggregation, analysis of and presentation of this journey as a case study for other groups to assist them in preventing this needless corrosive experience. Meanwhile, the photo of your wiring and its annotation is offered as a sample for reflection. So that's where I placed this photograph, and you can see this. This is the wiring that, according to Jimmy, JJ carried out in the Shed. So just look at that exposed cable. And if you look closely at the cable and examine it, the question is whether the rating is up to, I don't believe it's 2.5 square cable. However, this is the information which I placed to Jimmy. So that completes the first half of this. I will continue this later. Following my email of 1:45 on Friday, which I sent to JJ responded to me at 7:01 a.m., 7 o'clock that morning, so 6¾ hours later. His response reads, "Thanks for the email, Liam. So for clarification, I didn't send him an email. An email is not a text. Details matter." Several points of which I would like to address. So we're going to look at the several points. Point number one is, I have known Jimmy Ellen for much longer than anyone else in the Shed. We go back a long way. So again, that's a statement. It says that John Joseph Bradley has known Jimmy Ellen Boyle for much longer than anyone else in the Shed. So just reflecting it out with other Shed members, those who went to primary school at the same time as Jimmy Ellen, then the challenge here is that these people, that John Joe Bradley, who's entered this community relatively recently in the last number of years, seems to deny the fact that these people knew him much earlier, including Micheál Call, who is related to Jimmy and would have known Jimmy a long time ago. So there's a real question as to the veracity of that statement or accuracy. And also, it might be really possible that John Joseph Bradley believes all this. Anyway, he says, we go back a long way, and all that time I have found him to be trusty and honest, unlike some of the Shed members. Here again we have the unspecific broad, damaging, libelous claim about lots of some members, not who specifically under any time, no specific evidence, as is the way with both Jimmy Boyle and John Joe Bradley. For the record, Jimmy worked alongside me, trying our best to bring in much needed funds for the shed. Funny, you forgot to put that in your email to me. Again, it wasn't an email. And there's no question that JJ certainly, and Jimmy in some way, that they occupied themselves for their sole personal interest during the 18 months of lockdown, doing lots of busy things in the shed. The total contribution in net terms to the shed was something less than 1% of what the shed turnover was in 2021. So there's some context on it. He then goes on to personalise this. How much did Bernard or Austin or other shed member bring in? Now, Austin is the chairman. Bernard is the person who seemed to have driven JJ to force him to make this ultimatum. However, in the recorded video of the AGM in March the 4th, 2021, John Joseph Bradley specifically points out and congratulates Bernard on his efforts to bring money into the shed. So there's endless contradictions here. How much did Bernard Austin or any other shed member bring in? Again, dick measuring, that's all this is. I'm sure you will remember the stacks of reclaimed wood, pallet wood in the middle of the floor. Yes, both Jimmy and JJ filled the whole shed to the degree that people couldn't get up and down the floor, and there was a great annoyance among the shed members about this, especially if they wanted to go up and play bowls. A compromise was reached to persuade me to move them away from the shed, and that included removing all the old benches and installing new benches. Now, this is not part of a compromise. The plan to reinvest and try and rebuild the shed and create workbenches, etc., that would be like hot desking facilities rather than individual desks. A decision was made in the shed a number of years ago not to have individual desks. Jimmy Boyle went directly against that with the assistance of JJ, and down in the corner built his own little enclave, his own little spot, even though it was against shed policy. However, this was in the middle of COVID, and as chairman at the time, I said, look, we're just trying to hold the shed together. It didn't feel it the issue for me to try and, correct this action, and perhaps looking back, that was a bad decision or unwise by me. Anyway, JJ then said he then discovered that I was being screwed. I then discovered that I was being screwed and that one bench was being kept. Big mistake. I walked away disgusted and disappointed that all I had done in the shed counted for nothing. So what we're talking about is JJ done a lot of work in the shed, but in some deluded way felt that gave him a position, a disproportionate position, to be in a position to make an ultimatum against the majority decision of everybody else in the shed to get his way. And when he didn't get it, he walked. I'm sure you remember the meeting we had in your house to sort out the accounts and deal with the money the shed owed me personally. So let's go back. That's what I referred to right at the beginning of this recording. Now, what I said happened at this meeting was that John Joseph Bradley insisted that I would be there as a third party to authenticate the conversation he would have between him and Austin O'Donnell, the chairman. And my whole experience has been it's just another way of undermining or failing to recognise Austin's legitimate role as chairman, for which JJ himself had nominated him back in March. The meeting took place purely because of the fact that JJ had held the shed to ransom, threatening not to return the items belonging to the shed, the laptop, the iPad, the laptop being part of the MADIF support funding for men's sheds in Donegal, and also that he wouldn't hand over the accounts information when the shed was in debt to €9,000 to its three members and had grant agreement for that sum of money. So we couldn't even get that money back unless this meeting took place. So the meeting take place at the coercion and threats and ransoming of JJ. Now, so let's see what JJ said happened. You had the cheek to suggest that because I waited so long to claim back the money I had spent on behalf of the shed that I was not entitled to it. That is not correct. I had asked JJ prior to March as the outgoing chairman that he would put in his expenses, his unpaid expenses, and he put them in. Many of these were for items that he bought from rates in Stranorlar for parts of her wood turning lathe, which JJ had himself almost exclusively used for his own use. And the products of that work, he took them away with him when he left the shed. So while some items were sold and some money was brought in the shed, don't even know how much it was. The reality of it is, this is stuff that JJ did for himself. However, as part of the overall philosophy of trying to build a culture of positiveness, yet I had always supported this. And when JJ had put in his original cost of up to €576, I just was very happy to approve them. The other sums of money came back, many of them with unvouched details, dating back to 2017. Now, no accounting organisation could deal with something going back 4 years of information which was unvouched, unspecified, and not agreed by anybody at the time. However, that wasn't the issue. There was a sum of money of €157 and another sum of money of 157.32 cents. Now, any accounting recognition will recognise this is a rounding exercise that took place. It turned out when I examined the accounts that John Joe Bradley was seeking this money to be paid to him, even though, as it turned out, I found a record to say that he had actually drawn down the money and he'd been paid already. As John Joe Bradley was so focused on being righteous and strong and right, Evan, I simply asked him at the meeting to review the payment and his claim and ask him would he just examine it again to be sure. And he was quite obnoxious in his saying, how are you questioning me? So he wouldn't deal with any of this. So he says, I waited so long. So that was the previous money. He then said, I included one small invoice in error. Now, the invoice was €157 out of extra monies of about €500 there. So it's actually 33%. So it's not a small sum, percentage-wise not small. The other thing is, in the light of the fact that JJ was putting in for items as small as €2.30, small little items, some of these unvouched for, by the way, this was relatively significant. But more significant was the fact that JJ was making lots of allegations against lots of people. Yet here there was evidence that he had actually claimed twice for money had already been paid. In that conversation, JJ insulted his own intelligence by repeatedly failing to acknowledge that he had taken a sum of money, even to the extent that he pointed out, well, sure, it's 157.32 in an invoice, and yet the payment made out of the credit union to me was €157 dead. And he tried to say these were not associated. The next thing he did is when I showed him the documentary information from the credit union showing an IBAN number for an account, he said he didn't recognize it as his own IBAN number. So yes, it said here, you tore into me in front of us and insulted me verbally for what seemed like an hour. Yes, it took all of an hour to get John Joseph Bradley to recognize and acknowledge that he had falsely claimed for money he'd already been paid. And then, rather than apologise for having so doing, he blamed me for taking the trouble to point it out to him. Wow. Do you really think that I am vindictive? So in relation, I have no idea what John Joseph Bradley is. I know that the behaviour he has exhibited over the last period of time is both malevolent, damaging, narcissistic, self-serving, really, in my view, it's unsupportable by any evidence, but as regards his personal disposition, it's above my paid grade, it's not in my interest. With regard to the electrics in the shed, I will leave it to the HSA to deal with that. So I presume at that stage that JJ was intent then on complaining to the HSE. So just for the information, last Monday, which I think would be the 21st, and the day is 24th, so 23rd is Wednesday, 22nd is Tuesday, 21st is Monday. Austin O'Donnell received a letter, a hard copy letter from the HSA claiming that a complaint was lodged. It doesn't identify the person. From this information, I make the presumption that it's John Joseph Bradley. So that's the written correspondence through text that I have had and sent to John Joseph Bradley since last September. It is important for me to state here that unequivocally, John Joseph Bradley has made an allegation here, and this is an allegation, that he has on numerous occasions, right, made me aware. He said, I and other members of the shed pointed out to you on numerous occasions how dangerous the plugs are and the risk to anyone in the shed. This is unequivocally false. This is a false statement. I'm not sure if, I would imagine a lie is something you're cognizant of. But just to stay, and on Thursday last, witnessed by Mary Cleary, JJ repeated this claim that he had told me personally a number of times, and that he had people who would give witness to this. All of these are unspecific. And at this point, I'm sort of keen on getting to the point that we take everything out on the table, we examine what the facts are, and then we attribute a responsibility to those who carry that responsibility for their behaviours. Just to make it clear also that it's inconceivable in a society that someone, if it is found that they have made a malicious and wrongful and false allegation, can walk away scot-free from this, because the personal damage visited upon Austin O'Donnell as the chairman, who has medical issues, on me personally, who has medical issues, unnecessarily in my view, and without any support. And with the specific claimed and stated intent by JJ of ensuring that he's going to close the shed, and with the claim that with one phone call he can kill off the opportunities for this shed to receive any funding. This type of society, it is not good for society. We can't live like this. So, this video is made as a contribution to establishing the facts and the sequences of what have happened, and my objective is to try and document all of this, aggregate it, and put it together in a report and presentation which can possibly help to serve other men's sheds and other voluntary groups who undoubtedly will face this type of attack on their very existence. So again, at the moment it's 1932 on February the 24th, Liam Gógáin here.